It's that time of year again. The holidays right around the corner, and all the retailers are wondering, will shoppers spend or will they hold back? But this year feels a little different. Wall Street's not just kind of, relying on gut feelings and rumors this time around.
Yeah, it seems like they've got a new trick up their sleeve this year.
Right. So it's called alternative data, and it's less about, like gazing into a crystal ball and more about getting a real-time look at what shoppers are doing and even what they're thinking.
Yeah, it's like having eyes and ears everywhere, almost like 1,000 little spies whispering secrets about our shopping habits.
Okay, well, that sounds a little creepy.
Yeah,
So instead of, digging through those boring old spreadsheets and earnings reports, analysts are now like combing through credit card transactions and using our phones to track us everywhere. I mean, that sounds a bit like Big Brother is watching, doesn't it?
I can see how it could feel that way. But the real power of alternative data comes from, looking at the big picture, analyzing tons and tons of data. It's not about spying on any one person. It's about understanding these patterns
Hmm.
across, millions of consumers. For example, like just analyzing mountains of credit card data can show how spending habits are changing maybe for certain groups or even hint at bigger economic shifts.
So it's like taking the pulse of the consumer market in real time.
You got it. And that's exactly why investors are so excited about it. They're always looking for an edge,
Yeah.
something to help them predict what's coming next, especially during, a crazy time like the holiday season.
Well, one company that seems to be like leading the charge here is Eagle Alpha. And I was reading that back when they started in 2012, there were only about 100 alternative data providers. But now, get this, there are over 2,000. I mean, talk about a boom.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It shows just how much demand there is for this kind of data. Investors are starting to see that the traditional data sources, like they only tell part of the story, alternative data fills in the gaps. Gives a fuller, more dynamic view of the market.
So let's get down to brass tacks here.
Huh.
What are some concrete examples? You mentioned credit card data, but we're also talking about tracking people's locations through their cell
It,
phones, right?
it got it. Geolocation data it can tell you a lot about what consumers are doing. It can track foot traffic patterns, see where people are spending their time, and even show how effective things like billboards or ad campaigns are at, actually driving people to stores.
And then there's this whole world of social media. I mean, are companies really looking at our tweets and Facebook posts to try and figure out how we're feeling?
Absolutely. Sentiment analysis is a huge part of alternative data firms like 100X. They're using surveys and social media to measure how consumers are feeling about the holidays, certain brands or even the economy overall.
So it's like they're reading the nation's mood ring.
In a way, yeah. And it's valuable because it shows, the why behind the way people shop. Robert Pace, the CEO of 100X,
Yeah.
I think he said it best. He said the sale is not the outcome.
Interesting. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, just because somebody buys something doesn't mean they're happy with it or that they'll come back for more. Maybe the checkout line was a nightmare or the website kept crashing. Alternative data can help companies understand those little things and identify, potential problems that could affect whether a customer stays loyal or not.
I see. So it's not just about tracking sales, it's about understanding the whole journey the customer goes through.
Exactly. And that's why it's becoming so essential for retailers. It's giving them insights they just never had before.
Okay, so let's take a look at a real-world example.
Hmm.
100X has been gathering data on Target and Walmart, and it seems they've found some pretty interesting trends.
Yeah, they have. Earlier this year, their survey showed that shoppers were less likely to go back to Target compared to Walmart. But lately, there's been a noticeable change. More and more shoppers are saying they plan to shop at Target. It's what we call a contrarian view, where the data suggests an outcome that goes against what everyone's expecting or saying.
And that's particularly interesting because Target recently predicted that their holiday sales would be flat. Investors got spooked and their stock took a hit. But could this alternative data be suggesting something different, a different outcome?
It's certainly possible.
Hmm.
And it raises an important question: what data should we trust? Traditional stuff like sales forecasts or this new wave of alternative data?
It's like trying to pick between two fortune tellers, each one claiming to know the future.
And that's why it's crucial to understand the strengths and weaknesses of both approaches. Alternative data isn't a magic bullet. It needs to be interpreted carefully and, used along with other types of analysis.
So it's not about replacing what we already know, it's about adding another layer of insight.
Right? It's about seeing the whole picture, both the traditional and the alternative. And that's where things get really interesting.
Well, Target and Walmart aren't the only ones in the spotlight. Firms like Alpharos are taking a different approach. They're combining data sets with daily interviews to get an even deeper understanding of what consumers are planning to do. What's their strategy?
Well, Alpha Oak, they focus on the predictive power of everyday interactions.
Hmm.
Think about it. Every day we're making tons of choices, big and small, like what to wear, what to eat, where to go. Alpha Rose taps into those everyday decisions, to try and forecast where consumer trends are heading.
So instead of just looking at what we did in the past, they're trying to understand what we're planning to do in the future.
Exactly. And by combining that behavioral data with, real-time insights from those daily interviews, they can create a much more accurate picture of emerging trends. And this is where things get really interesting because you see, alternative data isn't just about predicting what we'll buy. It can also reveal where we'll go, what we'll watch, how we'll spend our time.
That's a good point. We've been talking a lot about retail, but you mentioned earlier that alternative data is being used in other sectors too, like urban planning and transportation, for example, right?
Oh, absolutely. Cities are increasingly using alternative data to understand traffic patterns,
Hmm.
optimize those public transportation routes, and even plan for future development. Imagine being able to predict how a new park or a new shopping center will affect traffic flow in a neighborhood. Alternative data can help urban planners make smarter decisions.
That makes sense. I mean, if you can track how people are moving around, you can kind of anticipate potential bottlenecks and come up with solutions before they become big problems.
Exactly. And it's not just about efficiency either. Alternative data can help cities become safer and more responsive to what their residents need. For example, by analyzing foot traffic patterns and crime data, cities can pinpoint areas that may need more police presence or better lighting.
That's pretty amazing. It's like using data to build a smarter, a more livable city.
And let's not forget healthcare. Alternative data is being used to track the spread of diseases, identify high-risk populations, and even develop more personalized treatments.
Wow. It seems like the possibilities are endless. But with all this data floating around, how do we make sure it's being used ethically and responsibly? I mean, this whole thing still makes me a bit uneasy.
I understand your concern. It's a tough balance, between using the power of data and protecting individual privacy. And honestly, there are no easy answers.
So what can we do? Are we just at the mercy of these companies that are so hungry for data?
Well, I think awareness is a good starting point. The more we understand about how our data is being collected and used, the better prepared we'll be to make informed decisions. And remember, we're not powerless. We have the right to opt out of data collection when we can, to choose companies that prioritize privacy, and to support policies that protect our digital rights.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but we do have some control. We just need to exercise it.
Okay, so we talked about Alpha Rho C, which is all about predicting future intentions. But there's another company that's doing some really interesting work with credit card data, Factious. What's their story?
Factious is taking a different approach. They're using anonymized credit card data to provide real-time insights into consumer spending. What's remarkable is that they can update retail sales outlooks every week, which means they're often ahead of even government estimates. It's like having a direct line to the heart of the economy.
So they're basically using our spending habits to predict how the economy is doing.
Essentially, yes. They can track trends in different sectors, identify up-and-coming brands, and even spot early warning signs of economic downturns.
That's a lot of power. And I bet it's incredibly valuable to investors, especially those trying to stay ahead of the market.
Absolutely. Factious has seen huge growth driven largely by demand from hedge funds and other investment firms that are, always looking for an advantage.
Mhm.
Well, they certainly seem to have hit on a winning formula. One example that stood out to me was their analysis of TikTok Shop. Apparently, they saw a dramatic turnaround in spending on a platform with an almost 17% increase in the average transaction value. That's pretty impressive considering all the bad press TikTok has been getting lately.
It is. And it just goes to show how powerful alternative data can be at revealing trends that might otherwise go unnoticed. Traditional retail metrics might have missed that uptick, but Factus's analysis provided a more nuanced and timely view of what was happening.
It's like seeing the market through a different lens, one that captures those subtle shifts and movements. But even with all this exciting potential, there are still those who are skeptical of alternative data. And some of their concerns do seem valid. We talked about Dave Powers earlier, the former CEO of Decker's Brands. He's been pretty outspoken about his distrust of this kind of data.
Powers and other critics, they argue that alternative data can be easily misused or misinterpreted, which can lead to, inaccurate conclusions and bad investment decisions. They point to examples where data has been taken out of context, correlations being mistaken for causation, and algorithms that are, biased or flawed.
So it's not a perfect system. There's still room for human error and bad judgment.
Exactly. Alternative data is a powerful tool, but it's only as good as the people using it. It requires careful interpretation, a deep understanding of the data itself, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Sounds like a delicate balancing act. You have to be confident in the data, but also aware of its limitations.
That's a good way to put it. And that's why it's crucial to have experts who can translate this data into actionable insights. It's not enough to just collect the data, you have to know how to make sense of it.
Well, it seems like Wall Street is definitely betting big on alternative data. And even some of the skeptics, like Mark Matthews from the National Retail Federation, they acknowledge that it's a force to be reckoned with. He's been quoted as saying, if it's out there, you might as well use it.
That's true. And that brings us back to 100X and that, interesting relationship they have with retailers. Robert Pace, their CEO, has talked about it as being a love-hate relationship. Retailers are drawn to the insights, but sometimes the data contradicts those carefully laid plans they've made.
That's got to be awkward. Imagine putting your heart and soul into a holiday marketing campaign only to have some algorithm tell you it's going to flop.
It's humbling for sure.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it's a good thing. It forces retailers to confront their own biases, to question their assumptions, and to be more data-driven in their decision-making.
So alternative data isn't just about predicting the future, it's also about challenging the way things are done and forcing companies to adapt to a rapidly changing consumer landscape.
Exactly. It's a wake-up call for the retail industry, and maybe even for all industries.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface of what alternative data can do. And as we head into the holidays, it's clear that this data is going to play a major role in how retailers market to us, how investors place their bets, and ultimately what ends up under our trees. It's almost like alternative data is becoming, Wall Street's hottest new commodity. But what about the rest of us? Where do we fit into all of this, this data-driven future?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think it's important to remember that Wall Street might be obsessed with, finding the next big stock. But this alternative data, it has implications way beyond just the financial markets. It's changing our daily lives in ways we probably don't even realize.
Okay, now you've got me curious. Give me an example.
Well, let's take personalized advertising. You ever notice how the ads you see online, they seem to know like exactly what you've been looking at or buying recently? Well, that's alternative data in action. Companies are using our digital footprints to target us with these incredibly specific ads.
Yeah, it is kind of creepy. But I gotta admit, sometimes those ads are right on the money. It's like they can read my mind.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. Imagine a world where your entire shopping experience is customized just for you.
Hmm.
Where the products you see, the prices you're offered, even the music playing in the store. It's all personalized based on your data.
Okay, now that sounds amazing and kind of scary at the same time. It's like ultimate convenience, but at what cost? My privacy.
That's the trade-off, isn't it? Convenience versus privacy. And there's no easy solution. But I think the key is being aware of the choices we're making and demanding more transparency from these companies that are collecting and using our data.
So it's not just about, opting out of cookies or using a VPN. It's about being more mindful of our data trail and, pushing for stronger privacy laws.
Absolutely. We need to hold companies accountable for how they use our data and make sure we have real control over our digital identities.
And maybe even rethink this whole model of data collection. Do companies really need to know everything about us to give us a good experience?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is probably not. We need to find ways to achieve the same level of personalization and convenience, but without giving up our privacy.
It's like trying to find that sweet spot between, innovation and ethics.
Exactly. And that's going to take a lot of creativity and collaboration between businesses, policymakers, and us, the consumers.
Well, it definitely feels like we're at a turning point. This alternative data, it's a powerful tool, but it's also a double-edged sword. And the choices we make today will determine how this technology shapes our world, in the years to come.
Well said. And that's exactly why conversations like this one are so important. We need to keep exploring these complex issues, asking those tough questions, and working together to create a future where data empowers us, not controls us.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought. Pay attention to your data trail. It tells a bigger story than you might think. And who knows, maybe it's already telling Wall Street what you'll be buying next.
Maybe. But for now, let's keep them guessing.